How do we crew these damn ships? is a question that frequently pops up in a lot of people's minds. There's a lot of people out there, myself included, who own ships that are rather sizable. There was an opportunity at one point to purchase a Javelin for myself, and I declined that opportunity. And I felt fairly secure in that. You know, recently we hit 100 players per server, and a lot of people going, "Hey, look, it just blew up. They doubled it." And well, it took a long time to do that. And you know, there's a way to kind of, you know, kind of say that and be negative about it. But there's also a way to be positive about it. We'll get to that in a second. But the server population hits 100. A fully crewed Javelin is 80 crew. There's a long way to go. When you see space battles, and some people are imagining Star Citizen's gonna have space battles, probably not quite on the scale of, let's say, the Battle of Endor from the original and only Star Wars trilogy. I don't know that we're ever going to get that far, but a lot of us do kind of feel a little bit nervous around the idea of how many people CIG can squeeze into a server, into a single environment, so that they can battle each other or help each other, you know, work cooperatively or against each other, have our big battles and whatnot. In order to really have that, you got to get a lot of people into that single instance. Now, if you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, and they've only gotten up to 100 in all this time since 3.0, and I would argue that, like a lot of things in Star Citizen, to kind of take CIG's side, maybe not in the way that they would like, but to kind of take CIG's side on this one, or to kind of steelman their position, I would say that we haven't seen CIG's full effort. We all know that Squadron 42 is the primary focus, and what happens in the persistent universe and what gets delivered to the persistent universe is usually none of it is really a true effort. It is, okay, how quickly can we get this together? Okay, back to Squadron 42 things. Because, I mean, even the personal inventory system, I mean, we're getting a select all now, which, you know, like, ooh, you know, wow. But, you know, we are getting that, but like the inventory system, mining, salvage. Well, you know what? Mining and salvage are things that are going to need obvious iteration. So you can't really say, oh, why isn't it delivered in a good state? But the inventory system is a good counter example to that, where it was just delivered it's a good idea, but it was just delivered in a terrible state, and it needed more work. Some of that is getting done, but not quite enough yet. That being said, we're not really seeing CIG's full effort. So while they did double it, maybe that was kind of like the easy bridge for them to cross, and going beyond that 100 is going to be where they really face a challenge. But until we get into a point where, you know, Squadron 42 is out of the way, then we can sit there and we can say, okay, now we're seeing CIG's full concerted efforts. You know, them, you know, throwing everything at the problem. And so, yeah, it's a bit troubling, but at the same time, I don't think it's indicative of complete impossibility. A few years ago, maybe back in the teens, I would have said something along the lines of, you know, I don't think that they're going to get much beyond that, because, you know, we've been in a lot of games, a lot of playable games that are really, you know, they kind of hit that limit around 100 players, 200 players, and then they just kind of fall off the map. And for a game with the amount of detail, the amount of first-person detail and interaction that you have with Star Citizen, it was kind of easy to see, like, oh, I don't know if they're going to be able to hit this. But I feel that enough time has gone by that we are kind of at one of these points where all of a sudden, you know, somebody in the gaming industry does something new and everyone goes, oh, this is how you do it. And then we kind of lurch forward. And that's a lot of the time when you kind of watch video games in the gaming industry, you realize that there are certain cycles where someone comes up with the new idea, the new thing, the new way of doing it, and everyone kind of emulates that and kind of puts their own little spin on it. And then the next person comes along and goes, no, here's even better. And then the cycle begins. And for a whole bunch of years, there's emulation. And then all of a sudden, someone makes the next big thing. So, I mean, it could be SC. So we'll really have to wait and see. But how do we crew these big ships? You know, it's still a valid question, because while these big ships don't represent the lion's share of the money that CIG takes in, a lot of it is the little doodads and the little fun, you know, fun little pieces of machinery that kind of come in that I would argue probably take up a large portion, or would be the better way to say it, a large portion of their income. I think that with the bigger ships, if CIG can't hit the population that they want to hit, if they get to a point where as these bigger and bigger ships are kind of coming into the game and we're very quickly running up against that 100 player limit in server, just not even in the question of, oh, well, we can get 100 players together, but if you're an org and you want to play together and you want to field a large number of your ships and your vehicles and you want to use a lot of this variety, it's very easy to see how those numbers pile up, and you can very quickly run out of room for other players in that server, and you can kind of enter into a state, you know, some people like to call this instance locking, where you kind of manipulate instance limits to basically make sure that everyone who wants to do things your way is all in the same instance together, and you can kind of take advantage of that in a myriad of ways. I think that we're going to get to a point where if it isn't possible, CIG will kind of default down to NPC crew members being the primary focus. A lot of us have heard about that in the past. CIG has talked about it. A lot of us have made plans / investments in that direction as a bit of a safety measure in case, you know, CIG's plans don't pan out. And it's entirely possible that that could be the case. One of the reasons to kind of say, you know, or one of the reasons that CIG might be holding back on NPC crew members, because we know that this is a thing in the game, and you know, some people say, oh, what do you mean? And it's like, well, every time you fight an NPC ship and those turrets are shooting at you, those are NPCs firing those turrets. And oftentimes, if you can see into the turrets, you can actually see the NPCs in them. So this is something that can be implemented in the game. In the past, they've said, oh, we lack for a UI to enable this for players and whatnot. But I would also think, you know, having, you know, thought about this for a long time, that a little bit, it's not just so much, oh, well, we haven't gotten around to it, but a little bit of it might also be CIG kind of wanting to say, you know, let's try to build the community into the habit of multi-crewing, and let's save the NPC thing for in case our grand design or our grand plan for, you know, these huge population servers doesn't pan out. The NPCs could be a bit of a plan B. Ultimately, I think it'll probably end up being a mix of the two, with certain amounts of limitations on players, so that you just can't go out and take a very large capital and fully crew it with NPCs. I definitely think that is still going to be an impossible pardon me, an impossibility. But ultimately, I think that we are going to have a certain amount of NPC, you know, implementation for players in regards to gunnery turrets. But beyond that, I don't think that CIG is going to really invest in going beyond that. I think that is ultimately going to be the upper limit, is gun turrets only. That's my opinion. That's my belief. That is not a fact. Whether or not it pans out, we'll have to wait and see. But depending on what ships you've chosen, even if you're alone, even if you're out there and it's, 3 in the morning and you should be sleeping, but instead you're playing video games and there's no one on to crew your ship, you might be able to mitigate that with NPCs, but fully crewing some of the much larger ships with much more complex workstations that require a player or, a sentient being's attention, I'm not fully convinced that that's going to pan out. But once again, that's my opinion. Anyways, we'll have to wait and see how this pans out. I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.